The Richard Roeper Show is brought to you by AmericanEagle.com Studios. The digital landscape is changing rapidly, and to compete in today's online business environment, you need an experienced partner. Since 1995, AmericanEagle.com has partnered with companies of all sizes. They offer the web design and the web development and the e-commerce and the mobile apps and the digital marketing, all of that to drive your overall business's success because they believe that today's online world is your online opportunity. Visit AmericanEagle.com to get started today. AmericanEagle.com.
You know the thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. When he comes at you, he doesn't seem to be living until he bites you.
Well, there it is, Jaws. It's the 50th anniversary of the film that brought about the dawn of the summer blockbuster era in 1975. And we're going to celebrate Jaws on the podcast today, guys, and also talk about some of my favorite summer blockbusters that came out after Jaws. Talking to some young people over the last couple of weeks in anticipation of the 50th anniversary of Jaws. Some of them have seen it and love it, and many haven't, and that's understandable because it was 50 years ago, which is incredible to me because I remember seeing it at the Dalton Cinema. I would have been, I think probably between freshman and sophomore years. And it was such a phenomenon. It had been a huge best-selling book by Peter Benchley. And then they were starting to make the movie, I think, of the book. I think maybe before the book had just come out, they bought the manuscript. And it's interesting with Jaws because, we think about the summer movie season now and how you get all the big summer movies, Avengers movies and Superman this year and Mission Impossible and Independence Day. And it seems like a no-brainer to put these big, fun summer movies in thousands of theaters because people are looking for stuff to do. But the mentality in the 40s and 50s and 60s and early 70s was that summer was the dumping ground, that people wanted to get out and go to the beaches and go to theme parks and go on drives across country and all that kind of stuff, which they still do, but not so much go to the movies. And that mentality changed, I think, for a lot of reasons. For one, movie theaters were conditioned, were some of the way back when. So that was a good place to escape. And then they realized, there is a huge audience, not just at drive-in theaters and not just to see B movies, but people want to have these event films. So Jaws came out in June of 1975. It's interesting. There was a movie called Breakout starring Charles Bronson, who was a great action star at the time. That was actually released about a month earlier. So when people say Jaws was the first movie to get the huge wide release, that's actually not true. Jaws opened in a little over 400 theaters, June 20th, I believe, 1975. Breakout actually opened in about 1,400 theaters a month before that. And Charles Bronson played this whiskey guzzling bush pilot. And the great Robert Duvall is a businessman who's been unfairly convicted, wrongly convicted, and he's in a Mexican prison. And now Charles Bronson's going to rescue him. That's the movie. It's an action movie. And it was a pretty big hit, actually. And that was the first attempt to put movies, a lot of times before that, even if you go back to The Godfather a few years before that, I think The Godfather opened in 5 theaters the opening weekend. Now, they would roll things out wide based on critical acclaim and obviously box office and word of mouth. And then pretty quickly you'd get to a few hundred theaters. But that was usually the way they do it. Movies would open in New York, LA, maybe Chicago, and then eventually kind of roll across the country. And that's why movies sometimes would play in theaters for up to a year. That goes all the way up to Titanic. Titanic in 97, it had a big opening, but actually kept expanding theaters and kept making the same $28 million week after week after week. It didn't have a $150 million opening. It just kept going, making 27 million week after week. So Jaws comes out, plays in 400 theaters, then went even wider after that, and got it got some negative reviews, but mostly great reviews, and the audiences loved it. And it became this whole thing, of course, the famous John Williams score. And I just want to talk about some of my own things that you might want to look at. This is more for people who have seen Jaws. If you haven't, you should check it out. I think, there might be some things you find a little bit cheesy and outdated because it's 50 years ago. But it's interesting because Jaws was originally considered one of the great scary movies of all time. Now it's considered one of the great movies of all time, period. Top 25. I would put it probably top 10 for everything it's done for how much it has influenced other filmmakers and films. The fact that everybody still knows the score and parodies for everywhere from Saturday Night Live to a million TV shows and movies. And even if you haven't seen Jaws, you know Jaws, right? You know what it is. Now, you do notice different things upon repeated viewings. And one of the things I noticed in a recent rewatch was, okay, there's the famous opening scene where there's a beach party. All the young kids are smoking a little dope, playing a little guitar, singing, having a few beers. And Chrissy Watkins is the skinny dipper who goes into the water, and the dude that's with her, he's too drunk and he passes out on the beach. And then we see Chrissy as she goes swimming into the water, and she gets yanked and tugged and eventually disappears. And it's a brilliantly conceived scene in the darkness of the night, in the water. The ocean is black, and we never see the shark in that opening scene, but it's more terrifying. And of course, throughout the movie, we rarely see the shark until very near the end. So the next day, Roy Scheider's Chief Brody is taking a call from the medical inspector, and he types shark attack under probable cause of death. And then he heads down the town square because he's going to go to the hardware store and get some signs to say the beach is closed, right? Now, if you watch that scene, it's very, very interesting because as Roy Scheider's walking, almost military style, and we can hear the band playing in the background because it's going to be the 50th annual regatta. It's a big, 4th of July is the big money-making weekend, and the summer is the big money-making season for the folks of Amity. But as Roy Scheider's walking down the street, in the background, we see a guy in a gray suit exit his office, and then we see another guy exit his office. And those two men, they're not identified at that point, but we quickly learn the first guy we see is the medical inspector, who's played by a real-life doctor. And then the editor of the local newspaper, the Amity Gazette, his name is Harry Meadows, and he's actually played by Jaws co-screenwriter Carl Gottlieb. Now, the reason the newspaper editor and the medical inspector walking out of their offices just behind Chief Brody, who doesn't see them, the reason that's incredible foreshadowing is a few moments later, Chief Brody's on the ferry. He's got to go warn those scouts who are learning, basic techniques on the water. He's going to warn them to get out of the water. And that's when the Cadillac Coupe de Ville pulls up and Mayor Larry Vaughn gets out and starts the whole spiel where he's telling Chief Brody, hey, it probably is a boating accident. It's a propeller. We can't say the word shark. But the very interesting thing here to me, upon repeated viewings, is that the medical inspector and the so-called editor of the Amity Gazette, those two guys are also with the mayor and also lobby Chief Brody to say this wasn't a shark attack. And that is an indication there. People talk about how Mayor Larry Vaughn, played by the great Murray Hamilton, is the villain in Jaws. And he's one of the worst villains of all time because he's so corrupt and so venal and so much in denial about reality that he keeps saying there isn't a shark attack even after the shark has gobbled up a couple of people. But the key here is that the media, in the form of the newspaper editor and the medical inspector, goes along with it, knowing full well that it was a shark attack. And Jaws came out in 1975, the year after Watergate. There was so much, and Vietnam was finally coming to an end, and there was so much distrust of government and authority, and it played into those themes of paranoia and conspiracy theories and don't trust the man so well. And I don't know if all of it was intentional, but there are things you pick up there in Jaws as you watch it multiple times. One of the other things I love about Jaws is that if you watch from the beginning and think about the scenes where there aren't shark attacks, it almost plays like a Frank Capra or Preston Sturges old-fashioned comedy about a small town. The way the actors interplay, there are lots of small comedic moments that are kind of played throughout. And that was the genius of the screenplay by Gottlieb and Peter Benchley, who wrote the novel, where they created all these memorable characters who only had a couple of lines. And some of them were played by just real-life townies to really kind of give it that air of authenticity. So there's a lot of banter and back and forth, and it's idyllic small town stuff, and then the shark comes in, and it's just such a great contrast between the two styles that we see there, where you get this kind of this old-fashioned screwball comedy, and then this terror on the seas with Jaws. Just brilliantly done. Also interesting to me that Jaws was given a PG rating. Jaws was rated PG. There's so much blood in Jaws. Now, until the end, when Robert Shaw gets gobbled up by the shark, we don't see a lot of the biting, but we see a lot of the blood. It's very intense. But at the time, in 1975, there was no PG-13 rating. The PG-13 designation wasn't implemented until the summer of 84. So it was either going to be a PG or an R. So you'll see a lot of films from back in the day, in the 70s, where there's nudity, where there's violence, and you're like, how did that get a PG? It's because if not, it was going to get an R, and they were pretty lenient about that. And then PG-13 came along as kind of the perfect compromise there. So Jaws, yes, rated PG. The score is iconic, of course. The sound team won Academy Awards. It is kind of, we talked in the last podcast about films that probably should have won Academy Awards. The Seth Rogen the proposal that we do the Oscars 5 years after the movies come out. Same thing with Jaws. It didn't win Best Picture, and Spielberg wasn't nominated for Best Director, I should say. Roy Scheider wasn't nominated for Best Actor. Neither Robert Shaw nor Richard Dreyfuss received supporting actor nods. Kind of crazy. So the score won. Jaws had a total of 4 nominations. The score won. John Williams, of course. The sound team, the editing, all winners. But geez, when you think about it, Jaws should have had at least 9 or 10 Oscar nominations.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Yeah, so 4 nominations, 3 wins, to get that clarified. 4 nominations for Jaws, 3 wins. Incredible that it didn't get more. It's just such a great film. You go back and you think of all the iconic moments, the speech that Robert Shaw gives about the USS Indianapolis, speech that was written and then rewritten, and he was supposedly drunk and then sobered up. And it's one of the most memorable speeches in movie history. The fact that Jaws has influenced everything from Alien to Signs to A Quiet Place to Nope. Those are all cinematic descendants of Jaws. And even the fact that they took a book that was, a best-selling book, but they've made it better. And they did the same thing with The Godfather. These great, big, fat paperback, hardcover first, then paperback best-selling books. And the films are just so much better than even the novels. The Peter Benchley novel, it's the foundation for the book, but there's all kinds of subplots that they wisely cut out of the final version, or the film version. I think in every case they made the right decision. So if you haven't seen Jaws, it's the 50th anniversary. Great time to watch it. If you have, it's a great time to rewatch and kind of keep some of these fun little behind the scenes things in mind. We're going to take a break. We're going to talk about Portillo's. Then we're going to talk about some of the other great summer blockbusters that came out after Jaws. All right, it's time to tell you about Portillo's, the greatest single fast casual cuisine experience you're ever in your life. Let's talk about the hot dogs and all the famous Chicago ingredients. They'll do it for you, so you don't have to worry about getting it wrong. That includes the poppy seed bun. Then we could talk about the Italian beef, the sausage, and the fries, the salad, the chicken, you name it, all topped up, of course, with the legendary Portillo's chocolate cake. It's fast casual. That means it's better than fast food. You can sit down if you go to one of the restaurants, but it's still super casual. And you can order anywhere in the country via Portillos.com. That's Portillos.com. Once again, Portillos.com. Ask your friends from Chicago about it. Portillos.com. Okay, so Jaws came out summer of 75, and almost every year after that, we've had a huge summer blockbuster, often many. When I'm putting together my list, and I've done this a few times where I've talked about my favorite films of the 20th century, my favorite Christmas films, holiday films, Oscar-winning films. When we talk about summer blockbusters, these are my favorites. Now, I'm not saying they're the greatest, because there are certain films that came out in various summers that were maybe considered higher levels of cinematic achievement. These are my personal favorites, and I'm going to start off by saying, full disclosure, I'm not putting Star Wars movies or Raiders of the Lost Ark movies on my list because while I certainly enjoy those films, I'm not the world's biggest Star Wars fan or the world's biggest Raiders fan. I'm not saying I'm not a fan, because I am. Love the Star Wars universe. I can't say that I've kept up with every single spin-off and branch and sequel and prequel and all of that. So I know some of them are really well made, but there were only so many hours in a man's life that I have. I do remember seeing the first Star Wars in theaters and being blown away, and I have nothing but great admiration for especially those first three, which are the middle three, and then we have it goes on and on. But just for me, there are certain types of films that I'm not a huge Star Trek guy either, guys. And again, I know the series is iconic and groundbreaking, and there have been amazing cinematic versions, and they're still making movies and TV shows. But you're not supposed to say Trekkie. You're supposed to say Trekker, right? I'm not a Trekkie, nor am I a Trekker. And I'd say the same thing about the Indiana Jones movies. I like them. I don't love them. They're not films that I would watch over and over and over again. People are sometimes shocked by that. You're a movie critic. How do you not love these movies? And I do love them, but I don't love them as much as the ones I'm going to talk about. Okay? So these are my personal favorites. I was just going through the various years after Jaws and thinking about different summers, and National Lampoon's Animal House, 1978. I remember going to see this at the Evergreen Park Theater with a bunch of buddies, and we had a bunch of Lowenbrows were smuggling in, and one of them fell on the sidewalk, and we just kind of moved quickly away, and, hey, who's dropped a beer over there? And that was the mentality of National Lampoon's Animal House. One of the classic college frat misbehaving drunkard movies of all time. And yes, if you go back and look at certain portions and parts of National Lampoon's Animal House, you're like, geez, But it was made in the 70s and set in the early 60s, and that's the way life was. And the great cast, John Belushi with almost no lines, stealing the show. And it's just funny as fuck, man. It's still super funny. And there's just something about that. The moment that movie starts, you're just along for the ride. So that's one of my favorites. I also have on my list of my favorite summer blockbuster movies of all time, The Fly.
How does Brundlefly eat? Well, he found out the hard and painful way that he's very much the way a fly eats. His teeth are now useless because although he can chew up solid food, he can't digest it. Solid food hurts. So, like a fly, Brundlefly breaks down solids with a corrosive enzyme, playfully called vomit drop. He regurgitates on his food, it liquefies, and then he sucks it back up. Ready for a demonstration, kids?
My God.
Talking about the 1986 version of The Fly with Jeff Goldblum, Cronenberg. Oh, man. Brundlefly. Remember that? Then he became more of a fly than a man. Brilliant makeup and special effects and prosthetics. Great performances. Eerie, violent, disturbing, and a great summer scary movie. Another film that I love that was a hit. It was a big hit at the time. And I think it's just kind of grown in terms of how people are so affectionate about it and really dig it. And that's War Games from 1983 with the young Matthew Broderick, of course. And he's the high school kid who taps into the government's defense system. And next thing you know, a nuclear war is imminent unless they can figure it out. It's so well done. It's like the perfect thriller for the time. I love the early computers. The cast is great. Dabney Coleman. And the pacing of it is beautifully done. And it's just a really cool story. And it is one of those things where you're like, wow, all these years later, so much of the messages still apply. But what a great piece of escapist entertainment, War Games. You might be surprised that Die Hard is on my list, because Die Hard, of course, is one of the greatest Christmas movies of all time. And it's set during Christmas. But the studio, I guess, didn't think that at the time, because they released Die Hard in July of 1988. It was a big summer movie, believe it or not. Now, of course, it plays every year in the holidays, and Die Hard, again, the perfect action movie. When you talk about action films, I don't know what tops Die Hard. It's in the top 5 for sure. It's funny, too, because when you look back at it, Bruce Willis was a big TV star, but not a big movie star. And they paid him a ton of money. $5 million at the time was unheard of, because they just thought he was the right guy for the franchise. They were right. In 1991, we got Terminator 2, Judgment Day.
Hasta la vista, baby.
When we talk about the sequels that surpass the originals, this is one that's almost always on the list. Godfather 2 can be in the discussion. Aliens can be in the discussion, which, by the way, came out in the summer of 86. And certainly Terminator 2 Judgment Day. The original is great, but man, the Terminator 2 Judgment Day is the best one of the franchise. And again, they've gone on, and we've had different versions of the Terminator story, and we've doubled back on the timeline. There's no way in the world anybody... we talked about Will Smith turning down scripts for Matrix and Inception on the last podcast. If you put all the storylines for Terminator movies together, it would make no sense. There's no way. And they could have ended it actually after Terminator 2, and it would have been perfect. But they haven't. They've gone on. Some of them have been really interesting, some not so much. But I love Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Apollo 13 came out in 1995. Ron Howard. Another film that just is such it's based, of course, on Jim Lovell and the true story of Apollo 13, but it became this great story. Ron Howard figured out the perfect way to tell the story of these three astronauts who had to come up with incredible, and with the help of the team on the ground, led by Ed Harris and everybody else, figure out how to get these guys home where they really, by all rights, by all science, it seemed like there was no chance they were going to make it back. I love Apollo 13. And you think about Ron Howard, he's still continuing to do great stuff, but for about 10 years there, from the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s, maybe 12 years total, what a run he had with Splash and Cocoon and Gung Ho and Willow, Parenthood, Backdraft, Far and Away, The Paper, Apollo 13, and Ransom. I mean, just one big hit after another. 93 was a great year for summer blockbusters with The Fugitive and Jurassic Park. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Back to the Future, 1985. And if we go back a few years before that, one of the ultimate summer blockbuster movies, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which came out in 1982.
E.T. phone home.
Oh my God, he's talking.
Home.
E.T. phone home?
E.T. phone home.
And man, I remember seeing that in theaters. I think I was just out of college that summer. And it just was one of those films where people were just swept away in the story, the incredible story of E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Some of my favorite summer blockbusters. A lot of good summer movies coming out this year, and we'll be talking about them right here on the podcast. I'm Richard Roeper. Thanks for listening.